Thank you very much. Welcome everyone to this session on locally led adaptation and how to get the partnerships right. How do we partner with each other to really get the finance down to the local level? I have an amazing panel today. We have one mic panelists. We're going to be playing past the mic and we're going to do it really fast and cleverly between us. We also have a couple of colleagues coming virtually, and hopefully that'll work, and if it doesn't, we will ad-lib. So why are we here? Locally led adaptation. We have been trying to understand what is it that gets finance down to the local level and enables more transformational outcomes to occur. How can we support adaptation in ways that also deliver on poverty, also deliver on nature? Because at the local level, communities don't see these issues as separate. We've been having conversations that led to these principles, and now we're a community of practice of almost, well, I think we're over 80, and there are going to be many more endorsements on Saturday. But we're also trying to understand how do we work together, because part of the issue is around the power dynamics and how different parties within the chain of delivering finance understand risk, how they understand capacity, and what expectations there are about time. So the provider gets funding from their treasury. They've got 4 years, a budget of 4 years. They pass that on. The intermediary then has to pass that on for a time within 4 years. So that passes down to the next level. If you have too many intermediaries, the time gets shorter and shorter, and suddenly communities are being asked to do something for 6 months and have a big impact. So we're really trying to unpack how do we partner together better so that we don't have some of these perpetual problems that we're facing within the industry, and try and move from about $1 in 10 reaching the local level behind communities' priorities to a much greater proportion. The LDCs have said they want it to be 70% as a minimum. Some countries like Nepal have said 80%. So we're trying to understand how do we do this better. That's the purpose of today. We're going to try and be really interactive, and that will mean that in about 20 minutes in or so, we'll be asking you all to gather into small groups and have conversations between you and then feed that back out to us. So, starting off with Dr. Buddhi Padal from Nepal. Thank you so much for joining us. We wanted you to just highlight from your experience in Nepal as one of the leaders on locally led adaptation. In fact, in some ways, you were the inventor of the idea. What has been working in your country, and what are the 2 examples of innovation that you think others should follow? What's perhaps the most significant innovation, and what would you like what 3 things would you like other partners to help you with?
Thank you very much for giving this opportunity. I will be very brief. Nepal has succeeded in ensuring a large portion of the funding goes to the local level and benefit the most vulnerable communities. This worked well because of 2 reasons to my assessment. The government of Nepal has very supportive legal provision to ensure that the larger portion of the finance goes to the local level. For example, our climate change policy that has provision to spend more than 80% of the climate finance that comes from the climate funds should go to the local level for the implementation of the local level adaptation. And second one is government of Nepal is also a pioneer country to introduce local LAPA, we call it LAPA, local adaptation plan of actions. So we have that framework, and then the vulnerability context of the local communities and people is considered one of the more, the important aspect. So these 2 examples, they are very supportive, and then that's why we are pioneer in locally led adaptation. The second, what is the most significant, the innovation in our work? So there are 3 points. One is design the decentralized financing modality. For example, for the change is at the local level. The legal provision must be strong, and then ensuring the compliance of our decentralized financing policy, that is 80% should go to the following level. And another one is important point is local leadership and ownership. So empower local communities so that the locally led adaptation is really locally led and mostly owned by the local governments and local communities. And third one is the focus on the most vulnerable segment of the society. So targeted approaches are most effective, and we need to use approaches that give priority to the most vulnerable segment of the society. So these 3 points, I think, are important to succeed in the locally led adaptation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was really excellent summary of the issues. Could I now ask our virtual friend, Dr. Anka Granderson from Canary, if she just wants to cover on the same process, what's worked, why, what are the most significant innovation? Please, Dr. Anka.
Thanks for that introduction, Claire, and I hope you guys can hear me okay.
Yep, perfect.
Okay, great. Greetings from Trinidad and Tobago. I really appreciate the opportunity to participate, although I can't attend COP in person, and excited to present on work that the Caribbean Natural Resources Institute Canary is doing. So we are a regional NGO that promotes stakeholder participation and stewardship of natural resources for sustainable development, and currently serve as the regional intermediary for the Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund's Caribbean Islands program, which is investing $11 million US from 2021 to 2026 to support civil society organizations, so that's including national NGOs and community-based organizations, to protect key ecosystems and build resilience, including through ecosystem-based adaptation. So in terms of the question of what's working in terms of getting finance to the local level, well, the program is designed as an integrated grant-making and capacity-building program, recognizing that strong local organizations are needed to implement effective conservation and adaptation measures over the long term. There's a strong focus on organizational as well as technical capacity building for our NGOs and CBOs that are grantees. Capacity building includes mentoring and how to develop strong proposals that meet the funder requirements, and how to manage, monitor, and report on the grant projects. We also cater to the diversity of NGOs and CBOs in the region, and so the program is designed to provide small grants of 50,000 US or less for smaller, lower capacity CSOs, and the process to apply for these small grants is quite simple, with just a concept note and fairly simple reporting requirements. And then we have large grants of over 50,000 US for larger, higher capacity groups that are typically in the range of 250,000 to $500,000 US. The program is also, I think, looking to address the specific challenges that have been identified by civil society and other key stakeholders, with key gaps and investment priorities identified with the input of over 175 stakeholders across 90 organizations from the region, so that, we're really trying to meet the needs that have been identified by the grantees themselves. In terms of the question of scaling up locally led adaptation, I think a closer look at the role of intermediaries and how they can help deliver finance at scale to frontline communities and other local actors is key. And I'm really looking forward to working with other intermediaries who are interested in this. At a meeting a few weeks ago, where a number of us met, I think it was very apparent that intermediaries are already supporting capacity building and meaningful engagement of frontline communities, including marginalized groups like Indigenous peoples, the very poor, as well as NGOs in planning and implementing solutions, catalyzing and piloting new approaches and innovations, and translating donor requirements, I think, into more manageable processes for grantees as well as loanees if you're doing microfinance. But we need to think about how we strengthen these intermediaries and what exactly they are, as well as how to better respond to the needs of local communities and organizations, including in very remote and high-risk contexts that are difficult to work with and where there may not be good sort of political structures in place. This includes shifting the narrative, I think, so we don't expect communities to bend to the requirements of us as intermediaries or the overall funder, but that we bend to their needs and create more streamlined and simplified processes with funders. Also exploring the role that intermediaries can play in de-risking investments through supporting pilots or proof of concept to build trust, as well as credibility, and pave the way for larger funding was also highlighted at this meeting. And I think finally, looking at how we can foster partnerships and invest in local capacity to scale up impact, including supporting cooperatives, coalitions, and other aggregated groups is also, I think, an area to explore as we try to scale up and really meet the needs.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anka. That was incredibly clear and real call to action for intermediaries. So if we go swiftly on, I'm sure we'll want to dwell on some of those points later, to Martin Kipping as the head of climate from BMZ, your reflections from your initiative.
Thanks. So from my experience, what works, right? So generally speaking, as I think all of us know, tackling climate change, increasing resilience, highly complex matter, a highly ambitious matter to tackle that properly, right? So for that reason, in general, our experience is bringing together different strengths, right? Different comparative advantages of actors in order to have more joint impact. To make that complete, how did we achieve that in the past and are hoping to continue achieving that in the future? First of all, German government obviously normally cooperates with other governments, right? That's bilateral plus multilateral development cooperation. So the national governments are our natural counterparts. But we have a huge program of partnering with non-state actors and non-governmental organizations. The typical program actually is channeling the funds through German NGOs who are requested in all cases to operate jointly with local NGOs, local non-state actors, right? That's mandatory. And that brings together the strengths of the local expertise, the local ownership, the local leadership, plus the international network and the international experience of the German entity through which we can channel the funds. First example. Second example, on the climate risk analysis. We have a program with PIC, the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, that is delivering climate risk analysis and profiles with a focus on sub-Saharan African countries. And these are always done in close cooperation with the local partners, local research institutions. And that again, that brings together that deep local knowledge, a knowledge of local circumstances with a cutting-edge international research institute, which is the PIC, right? Delivering top-notch, we believe, analysis. The third and last example from me on the climate risk finance and insurance side of things. So some of you might have heard about the so-called tripartite agreement. So that's BMZ, my ministry, together with UNDP and IDF, that's the Insurance Development Forum, partnering to deliver climate risk protection, financial protection to countries. And not only to countries, but also to subnational actors. One pretty innovative project, I think it was signed last year, is with Medellin in Colombia, right? So actually UNDP together with IDF, local organization, and with our funding, they have delivered sort of a climate risk insurance approach for Medellin. So in case for natural disaster that would hit Medellin, that there would be a quick payout to be able to reconstruct the municipal infrastructure in Medellin. Last point from me, looking ahead, I think you were also interested in hearing from me about that. What are our wishes for further collaboration with local actors, with local communities? You might have heard about the initiative jointly steered by the G7, currently under German leadership presidency, and the V20, so the group of 58 countries, the finance ministries, on the global shield against climate risks, right? Which will be officially launched next Monday here at COP. And the idea is to deliver country protection packages, starting with a range of pathfinder countries to road test the approach. And it's very clear in the approach that these packages, based on analysis of what are the risks and what are the protection gaps, that they are supposed to be developed in close cooperation with input of the local communities, local stakeholders, be it civil society, private sector, science, etc. So that's where we need all hands on deck tackling. But it would be less adaptation, I think, in this theory. It would be rather tackling losses and damages. But that's something where we really need all hands on deck, and that means in particular, and most importantly, the local and national actors.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Martin. So, Buddy, do you have 3 wishes for others to work with you as well?
So actually, I'm from a mountainous country like Nepal, and then actually the capacity building at the local level is very, very important. So we have to enhance the capacity of local institutions so that they will be able to implement projects at local level. And then, as I said earlier, that the government should have favorable policy and legal institutions to recognize their role and responsibility, and again clear role and responsibility empower them to to take ownership and to lead on successfully the adaptation project. So yeah, this is from my experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Anka, do you have a further wish from the list that you gave from the intermediaries discussions?
I think in terms of our wish, it would be to really see a scaling up of financing. I think we mentioned the LDCs wanting 70% of finance. If in the Caribbean space, we would definitely agree with that. We're not getting enough financing down to the local level. And so at least 25% of all adaptation finance that's coming in really needs to be delivered to the local level to help the most vulnerable and those on the front lines. And we really need to think about the best ways to deliver that, whether it's through intermediaries, whether it's through mechanisms like enhanced direct access under the Adaptation Fund, Green Climate Fund, other funds. And so that's my additional wish to add to the list I had.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we've heard the 3 opening statements, 1 provider of finance, 1 recipient of finance, and 1 intermediary. We're now going to move into the next set of contributions, building on the 3 wishes. I'm just going to summarize those last 3 because I thought they were excellent. How do we collaborate on the analysis and then the response on issues like loss and damage as part of the continuum of adaptation, shall we say? How do we skill up the local partners so that they are capable of doing what is needed and supporting the local communities in identifying those top priority investments? And then from Anka's side, how do we really expand the scale of finance? Can we have a minimum of 25% going to locally led approaches? So now moving on, we have Rosemary from Climate Wise Women from Uganda. I'm sorry, I should have told you in advance. So we might not have Rosemary right now. We're going to try and get her online. She's just trying to join. Okay, so as soon as she joins, let me know, or maybe we can have her alongside Anka. So then perhaps Sylvia from USAID, could I ask you to tell us a little bit about what you're seeing as the top lesson and the top ask, if you like, for how do we move forward on improving partnerships?
Thank you so much. So let me just first share with everyone what USAID is doing to adopt locally led adaptation. So first I want to say that our administrator is deeply committed to the localization agenda, and that means that we're starting to do things differently. We're not just doing business as usual. We define localization as making sure that local communities are at the center of our development and our humanitarian work. That also means strengthen local systems. It means responding to local needs. And we're doing it because we have seen and we have witnessed and we have evidence that when we do things this way, development outcomes are more sustainable. So let me just give you an example from USAID Colombia. This is where my mission is and where I come from. We've been supporting ethnic communities in the Pacific coast of Colombia. These are impoverished and very vulnerable communities, to lead their projects to reduce emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. And after almost a decade of working with them, empowering them, now we see that they're leading their own projects and that they're able to reduce deforestation and creating payment for results from the private sector. So climate finance is finally getting to those communities, and now we are seeing that once that USAID withdraws, they're able to lead their own future in terms of increasing resilience, promoting local development, and also sustaining the reduction of deforestation in this region. So we believe that when we promote localization in the agenda, we are very much aligned with our other values of equity as well as inclusion. Now, I also want to mention that we are doing, this is not a new idea. I think that we've been discussing this for quite a while, but now we're doing things a little bit different, as I mentioned before. So let me just tell you that we're working in 4 different fronts at the same time. First, we're adapting our programs to make sure that localization is at the center. So last year at COP26, President Biden launched the initiative, the President Emergency Plan for Adaptation and Resilience, PREPARE. And with this initiative, we hope to be able to support 500 million people around the globe to better adapt to the impacts of climate change. But how are they going to make this sustainable? We're putting communities at the center. We also have a new climate strategy, and localization is a key principle. And finally, this year, we launched the local capacity strengthening policy. So we're basically making localization a core principle in the work we do. We have a goal, and which is to make sure that at least 25% of our funds are directly implemented by local partners. We also shifting power to local partners. We're making sure that, as our colleague from Germany mentioned, the academia, the civil society, the private sector, they participate along the project cycle of our activities on the ground. And finally, and with this I want to close, we want to use our convening power to invite others to join the locally led principles. We believe we need others. We believe that we need this movement to grow and to bring more adaptation to local communities through direct financing. We're using our convening power. A couple of months ago, you helped us moderate a discussion with the World Bank and other key actors. And we believe that more donors and more governments can join the principles, and other organizations like the Resilience Hub and others can help us understand what we're doing better, what we're not doing good, and how we can improve it, and how can we move forward with this agenda.
Thank you so much. Isn't it beautiful when someone calls out for at least 25% finance to get to the local level, and the donor immediately responds, says, yeah, we're going to do that. Perfect. Thank you so much. So I'm wondering if I've got Rosemary yet. No. Okay. So Jackson, we often hear how much harder it is to do this with enterprise. So you're going to tell us it's not, I think.
Yes. Thank you for passing the baton. I'll try to run my leg of the race here. At PayPal, we're really thinking about financial health and inclusion. And so naturally, adaptation resilience solutions is the fit when we think about climate action at PayPal. I first just want to thank IIED and WRI, I think have some folks in the room here, involved in developing the locally led adaptation principles. Just a super valuable, seminal work. I hope everyone's had a chance to consult those. It's definitely informed the approach that we're taking. And so over the past 2 years, we've been working with 11 organizations, including PayPal, to launch the Climate Innovation for Adaptation and Resilience Alliance. And what the CFAR Alliance is focused on is the private sector, and specifically entrepreneurship and innovation at the local level, building that capacity, as has been alluded to by some of the other speakers here today. So we have a working group model within the CFAR Alliance, 8 different working groups coordinated across 40 different contributors. And would like to just highlight one of the initiatives that one of these working groups is focused on is blue economy here in Africa. And through the TECA Blue Wave program, there are now 30 entrepreneurs across 8 different countries in East Africa, all the way from Egypt down to South Africa. 30 entrepreneurs, 50% of whom are women, all running through a venture building sprint program. And so they're creating startup companies, getting investment from funders. And one of those entrepreneurs is actually in the room here today, Amir. Arguably, he should be in this seat rather than me, but appreciate that I had the opportunity to shine a spotlight. So Amir and his co-venture launchers are building a carbon bank for Africa. And the go-to-market strategy, and Amir can speak to this a lot better than I can, so if he's able to stick around for the breakout, would encourage you to pick his brain about it. But the go-to-market strategy is really focused on ecotourism, and tourism as the entry point, the go-to-market for bringing financing in to supporting carbon mitigation projects that also bring dollars into the local community. And it's just one example of the incredible enthusiasm and talent and entrepreneurship and local knowledge that these entrepreneurs have. And so building that capacity, creating the opportunity for these ventures to launch, we hope over time in the years to come, will create the next generation of large-scale enterprises that can really bring jobs and bring money into the community. So yeah, really excited about that opportunity and look forward to hearing from the rest of the panelists. Pass the baton.
Thanks so much. So it is really exciting to hear from how we can begin to engage with enterprise and really support enterprise at the local level. I'm really delighted now to ask Charles to tell us a little bit. I have to say PACTA was one of the leading partners in developing the principles. It was very much a huge effort. There was hundreds of different organisations involved, but PACTA was really involved from the very beginning. So let me ask you to just give us your top ideas about what the innovations are and what you're asking others to do.
Thank you so much, and I should say that we are very, very proud, to have been part of the team, really, that was focusing on those principles of Rockery, RED, climate actions. Now, perhaps some of the 2 words that have been used a lot in this conference are frontline communities. And everybody go to any side event, go to the main negotiations, we are all talking about frontline communities. The communities that are really in the front line when it comes to the impacts of climate change. Think about this way. A few days ago, in Kenya, a woman goes to her granary, finds nothing, goes to her farm and finds nothing that she can cook for the children, and she resorts in catching 2 chameleons, prepare the chameleon, poisonous chameleon, and serve that dish to small children below 5 years. Now, those children are recuperating in the hospital as we are talking. Now, that woman forms part of the frontline community. Think about another gentleman from Marsabit County in Kenya, who is together with us, but at the green zone, who had hundreds of camels, hundreds of livestock, but he has nothing, zero, because of the drought that is affecting the Horn of Africa region, where that 8 million people are really staring at starvation. Now, that is how urgent the whole question of adaptation and availing resources that are needed for adaptation is. Where we are here arguing about commas and full stops and paragraphs in the negotiations, we are forgetting to see the human face in the whole discussion around adaptation. And we are saying time has come now to actually reach the frontline communities, and probably this is what the intermediaries needs to do. We need to spend probably a rest in terms of supporting our policy and regulatory frameworks. We have enough policies in the shelves. We have enough plans, including NDCs, very beautiful ones that are formulated. But what needs to happen is that we need to put very resources to be able to implement those particular strategies. Make no mistake, sometimes we think that we require a lot of capacity building for communities, for them to get to understand some of the adaptation strategies they need to engage. But we forget the fact that these communities are not tabula rasa. They're not empty slates where we can write. They have their own indigenous information, indigenous knowledge that is sufficient, to help them move the next mile, if only they're given resources to be able to implement, what they actually know. And that is why it's very, very important to ensure that resources are not trickling to the communities, but it's flowing, through the bigger pipe to where it is actually needed most. And that is important. Now, if you look at what is happening in terms of the adaptation financing gap, in Africa only, we have a gap of over 100 billion. Now, this 100 billion is what was being promised, per year, up to 2020, which never came through. And that is Africa alone. I'm sure the situation in Asia Pacific is no different. The story in the Caribbean is no different. And therefore, there's a huge financing gap. And the problem is, even the literal resources that are available through the climate finance infrastructure that we have, talk about GCF, talk about the adaptation fund, the modalities of accessing those resources is so difficult. It's almost equivalent to developing a PhD thesis for a woman who is cooking chameleon for the children. And therefore, we must really revisit the modalities of access for such resources. So you realize that organizations that are able to probably apply for those resources are the elite, the middle class. And when you get those particular resources, sometimes we invest where we should not necessarily be investing in. We think that it's a capacity gap that is there. We think it's about probably the issues of policy, and therefore we keep on, doubling our efforts, in terms of duplicating efforts in building other policies, in supporting governments in terms of revisiting and reviewing the policies that probably have not even worked. So it's very, very important to ensure that we actually make, mechanisms of access for such resources, to be very, very easy for the communities and the grassroots to be able to apply for those resources. At Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance this year, we have come up with some innovation where we have developed a small grant facility, whereby communities, and not big NGOs, but women groups in the villages, the fisher folks, the youth groups within the communities are able to access some resources to be able to implement direct activities that will actually be able to generate results, at that particular grassroots level. The other issue is, even though there are some resources within GCF and Adaptation Fund, it is still not enough. I know within the CDM arrangement under the Kyoto Protocol, there were some resources that were being, of course, directed to Adaptation Fund as a result of the carbon business happening under that, compliance market. Now we are transitioning. We are going to Article 6 and especially 6.4 on market mechanisms. At least we now know that we have what we are calling share of proceeds, and at least 5% would probably be directed to Adaptation Fund. But that is still not enough. I think we need to call upon, financiers, and our multilateral partners to think so much about, increasing, those resources, because adaptation needs in Africa is perhaps more. It's actually more than a mitigation, requirement. We've been talking about 50-50 balance, but I think we need to think about probably going beyond 50, because adaptation is a necessity. It is something we cannot avoid. Mitigation only gives us an opportunity to transition in a different trajectory. So what is needed now are urgent measures to ensure that resources are flowing down to the communities. Thank you.
Thanks, Charles. I'm going to push you in a minute on solutions, because we do hear about the problems a lot. And is the small grant scheme that you're developing in PACTA what you see as the solution? What else would you be looking for? But before I do that... 5 minutes. It's gone away. Rosemary? Yeah. Okay, all right. Rosemary's trying to find somewhere where there's power in rural Uganda, so that's what's happening there. So I don't know, Sylvia, if listening to your other panelists, whether there's anything that you think the providers of finance could be doing more. I guess I might also come to Martin on that one. How can you respond to some of these challenges or some of the opportunities that we're hearing about?
No, thank you. So by hearing the others, I feel like we have to make sure that our procedures for allocating our funds are streamlined. Like when I think of every single step that at USAID we have to take in order to award a grant, and I think whether a local community is able to meet every single requirement, I do see a barrier there. So on one hand, we need to continue to strengthen the capacities of local communities to have direct access to donor funds. But on the other hand, we also have to make sure that we streamline our processes, that we understand local needs, that we understand also local capacities, because we're not going to be able to grant funds locally if we are requiring local communities to comply with such high-level requirements without really understanding what they have been, how they have been building their own communities and how they have been building their organizations. So that's something that we have to continue working inside our organizations to make sure that at least from the donor perspective, we get closer to local communities. That's one point. The second point is that we do have to work with more partners, because sometimes we can enable finance for adaptation when working with the private sector, as the two initiatives that you mentioned, when working with the financial sector, and when working with other partners. So that's something that we have to continue doing. And again, this is a call for other donors and other governments to join the principles so we can work together to make it happen.
Do you want to respond to that?
Thanks. I mean, just very quickly, certainly as Sylvia mentioned, streamlined application processes, climate funds in particular, important. We're working on that with a range of other donors. It's a problem, actually, the access not only faced by local communities, right? It's a problem faced by national governments also, right? So that's a cross-cutting thing. And probably a local community won't go to the GCF, right? So there is a need for a different approach there, rather having overarching programs that can be easily accessed, while maybe there are some more, well, some more complex necessities for application of these overarching programs, right? To get the approach right. My second point, I think it's important not to look only at how can the local community connect directly to international funds, right? I think that's hopping too short. I think it's fundamentally an issue also of national governance, right? So how do the local and subnational communities work with the national governments? What's their role therein, right? And there's much work to be done, and also much work, I believe, being done, at least in our system, in assisting national governments in getting that right? Improving that. Decentralization work. That's large programs, at least in our system, not necessarily, probably not earmarked or labeled as adaptation finance, but systematically pretty fundamental in getting adaptation finance and support to the local level, right? Decentralizing national systems, making sure that the national funds get down to the local level. And in the end, it's about also the local communities, or the population at large, to hold their governments accountable, right? It's their governments. Sure, that's easy to say and a very hard thing to do, right? But in the end, there won't be a way around.
Wonderful, thank you so much. So we now have Rosemary Atieno, I believe, who's joining us from Uganda. Rosemary, it's so wonderful that you could join us. Can you hear us all right? So, Rosemary, what's your top lesson? I mean, coming from a community organising group, making sure that women understand what is happening with the climate, understand how they could be responding. What's your one lesson and what's your one ask?
Thank you so much. Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are. It's afternoon in Kenya. So I want to say that working with rural communities has been such a pleasure. However, what I have learned and what I have come to realize is that local financing is not really getting down to the community person who is supposed to be actually doing the local-led adaptations. So the money is centrally controlled somewhere. And when you ask for communities maybe to write proposals to be able to do some work, you realize that the proposals also have a lot of bureaucracy, and communities are not able to access this money. So one of the things that we are saying is if things can be made simple for the communities to be able to access this money, to be able to do the work that they are supposed to do. So one request I would have for the people financing for our donors and the global world is, can we make local financing easily accessible to the grassroots community woman? And one thing I would ask is, if we are to do even proposals from the grassroots, maybe we would use other methods of doing proposals, not necessarily writing in English and writing big jargons, but maybe we get a community with a video to showcase what they're doing. Then from that video, we can easily tell what they are able to do, and we are able to get the financing reaching to them. But as we speak now, local financing is still very difficult for local communities to access. Yeah, so that's one of the key lessons I have learned.
Thank you so much. So that's a brilliant ask of the community, of partners, is how can there be more verbal applications? We've got a couple of questions for the chat for the panel. One is around that capacity building takes time and resources. Ainka was telling us earlier about, as an intermediary, how they deliberately invest in the skills, both the climate skills and the management skills, as part of the process. The question from the chat is, what's the commitment of donors to support this? I guess it's also, what's the commitment of the national governments to make sure that's part of the strategy in country? I just wonder, Budi, whether you'd respond to that one first before we go back to the donors.
So actually, with regards to adaptation, we have plan and targets. So to implement them properly at the local level, we really need additional finance. And then, as indicated from my colleagues earlier, the simplified access and quick access and simplified process is important. Also, we have to channelize the domestic and private sector funding also. So how can we best utilize those sources to implement local level projects? And the finance should be, grant-based, and public financing can be, that should be prioritized. Actually, the finance should be going to the local level to implement the local communities' needs and priorities. So then it will work. So this is the most important, I think, issue as of now. Thank you.
Thank you. So the two questions that have come from the virtual group is all about capacity. So I'm going to ask you all to be thinking about this in different ways. Is A, how can you get the finance? How can we invest in the capacity? How can we make that part of and a deliberate part of an investment strategy? But secondly, also, how do you assess capacity building outcomes? And I wonder, Charles, whether you can very briefly just, what's Pacture's experience of assessing capacity building outcome when you're working with your grassroots partners?
Thank you so much. And just to mention, from the Africa perspective, our governments really have been investing in adaptation, knowingly or otherwise. They have been doing that, and probably they need much more support. But coming to your question regarding how then we assess, probably the outcomes of whatever is happening at the grassroots level, I want to say that we've been running some sort of a demonstration for locally led initiatives, with some communities. And of course, we've been able to document quite some good lessons. One of them, of course, being, like I did mention, that there's a lot of knowledge really among the communities. The frontline communities, they have so much information. They know what they need to do. But again, some of those particular lessons, we are now, upscaling that, in terms of using that, in terms of replicating some of these initiatives together. We have had one project in Kenya, where we've been able to work with communities in terms of using some drought-resistant, varieties. And I have a book here that actually documents, some of the successes of that particular project. And we're talking about a community that was focusing on one cash crop that was so much affected by COVID-19. And we were able to introduce a different kind of crop around the area, and successes are really massive. Such demonstration and such kind of packaging of this information can actually be shared, for replication, to other areas. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Anka, would you like to respond on how the sort of issues of capacity building, how do we make sure the finance is there, but also how do we assess outcomes in improving capacity building?
Yeah, so thanks for that, Clay. I think I want to just sort of re-emphasize a point that I made earlier, which is that trying to do grant making or develop microfinance and loan programs that integrate capacity building, I think is really important, so that we're supporting both of those things together and strengthening these local organizations while we're giving them financing. So I think really building that in and thinking very, very sort of holistically about how you do that is very important. In terms of measuring outcomes, we actually are an organization that focuses on capacity building. So for us, we already have a process in place where we do needs assessments to see where people are at for all of the programs that we run. And we really sort of try to assess and evaluate whether we've had the impact that we're trying to see. And so for us, under the program that I talked about earlier, the CPF Caribbean Islands program, we know that for the first phase that we had back in 2011 to 2016, we had a number, I think 68, 70 civil society organizations that we supported. And a number of them have now graduated to being able to access larger grants and do bigger projects since then. And now that we're going into this new phase from 2021 to 2026, we're seeing them going up for the larger grants and being able to do much more interesting work on the ground. So for us, that tells us that the work we did with them to strengthen them has had the impact that we want to see, and that they're able to deliver locally led adaptation and build resilience more broadly in their communities with more financing and do more based on the work that we've done. And that's what we want to see when we're doing these programs in terms of the progress made.
Thank you so much. Okay, so peer-to-peer learning from a suggestion from Pakcha, from Anka and Kanari's experience of a sort of empowerment pathway of small levels getting experience, demonstrating capability, and then being given the opportunity to apply for bigger grants over time. I'm just wondering on the enterprise size, Jackson, whether you've got some ideas to share on building that capability at the local level.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that. And just reflecting on and trying to build a little bit on what we've heard from some of the other panelists here today, Anka and Rosemary in particular. I think one of the things that I'm learning here today is that there's an incredible network of organizations just represented here. And so I think parts of the solution are building networks and really investing in relationships between organizations, between people, so that there's just that human infrastructure to mobilize finance. And then the other component I would speak to, and maybe I'm a bit biased being from the technology industry, but I think there's a real role for technology, for digitization to play in improving the efficiency, the transparency, and the speed at which financing can flow. One of the technologies that we think has promise down the road is blockchain. So we're spending some time within the CFAR Alliance looking at blockchain solutions and how they could play a role in not only climate mitigation, but also enabling resilience and adaptation outcomes. So I would reinforce the value of networks and ask everyone to continue to invest in your networks, invest in scaling this adaptation finance over time, and then look for ways that technology can help to enable that.
Thank Thank you so much. So, Rosemary, if you're still there, we're coming back to you at the end and ask you what you think of some of these ideas. And I'm wondering, Sylvia, if you can, we've had the request from Rosemary about a, more verbal way of doing things. And actually, Charles was sort of highlighting the importance, as I think Jackson did as well, of learning from each other. What are you seeing as the ways to really drive this at speed, the sort of building that capability and building the pipelines to get the investments at the local level?
No, that's a great point. So I just wanted to mention that we do have a lot of experiences in making sure that in our programs we build capacity of local actors and local communities to access grants from their own program or access funds from the government, or if we're supporting, for example, local businesses, to build the capacity of local businesses to be able to access the financial sector as well. So within our programs, we have to make sure that there is a capacity building component always, all the time. This is key in order to make sure that in the future, these communities can continue pursuing the development outcomes through different funding or through their own funding. So that's one key point that I wanted to mention. The second thing is that you also talked about, and we also talked about, how do we measure capacity building? And usually in our programs, we have an indicator or number of people trained, right? And that's not enough, right? Because there is a difference between people being trained and then people being able to access the funds with the training that they received. So we do have to come up together with local actors on key priority indicators to be able to measure performance of that training. Training is not enough. Usually when you do training, some people come to the first training, but others come to the second training, and you don't see continuity in the capacity building that you were supposed to build. So we want to make sure that we together come up with key indicators to make sure that that training is actually giving effective outcomes, and that we're seeing communities getting more direct funding. So these two ideas for your question.
Thank you, Sylvia. That's music to my ears. I'm a great believer that training is not capacity building. Training is a training. It's maybe just one part of a process. Martin, would you like to comment on this before we go back to Rosemary?
Thanks. Maybe two further lessons, at least, I'm trying to learn. I think, first of all, for capacity building development to work, it's key to have, familiarity, deep familiarity, knowledge of the local context, right? Avoiding fly-in, fly-out missions. Really building on trusted relationships. Because, let's be clear, local or locally led project doesn't automatically mean project focused on the poorest and most vulnerable in the climate sphere, right? You need to have an understanding also of the political economy on the ground, right? There are these political economies everywhere at all levels, also at the local level. So building on deep familiarity, knowledge of the local level to choose an appropriate approach for success. So we in the German system, you might be familiar with GIZ, our technical implementation agency, who normally is in countries for many years, has established relationships with the local actors. So that's a capital we can really build upon. And they are always closely working with the local partners, actually sitting in their offices. And that's the first thing. Second, last thing, I think huge potential to be further exploited also is also not to be limited to the vertical approach, right? Local community getting funds from some international donor or a mezzanine fund or whatsoever, but going also horizontally, all right? One recent example from our financial corporation implemented or funded through KfW, our development bank, is the urban infrastructure insurance facility in Latin America, right? That basically focuses at a range of municipalities in different countries, and they are building up a joint approach, joint risk pool, actually, to ensure their infrastructure against climate risks, right? So going horizontally, that's also, we believe, an approach that has huge potential and that remains underexploited for the time being.
Thank you. And in many ways, the community organising groups, like people like PACTA, people like Rosemary's Women's Climate Centre initiative, those are horizontally connecting organisations. So we're just about to go into the audience here, actually being part of driving the solution. We're going to be focused very much on solutions. We know the problems. We're going to be inviting you very shortly to get turn your chairs and talk to your neighbours. But Rosemary, before we do, any last words on, what is it that's going to drive a real step change, do you think, for women in Uganda?
Thank you so much. I want to say at Women Climate Centers International, we are focusing on working with the grassroots community. And I want to echo what my colleague has just said, that you really need to understand the local context. So we have worked with these women for quite a number of years. And the method that we are using is what we are calling community dialogues, where we sit with the community, talk with them, understand their context, so that we are able to co-create solutions with them. Why are we co-creating solutions with them? We want to build sustainability. We want to capacity build them. We want to enhance their capacity in already what they know, because they have a lot of knowledge that is indigenous, and the indigenous knowledge has come to our realization that is very important in helping our communities to cope. So as we co-create these solutions, we are also trying to train trainers of trainers amongst them, so that the knowledge, we leave an institutional legacy for them. So amongst the trainings is also about how do you raise funds, how do you get money, how do you make your adaptations or your reactions sustainable to the local level. So in doing this, I think that the women are coming to realize that they really own the process. They're coming to realize that they are really co-defenders of climate change, and they're really co-actors in doing this. So as we say that we need to allow them to access local funding. I know in Kenya we have FLOCA, which is coming down slowly as our county systems are putting measures in place and systems in place to ensure that this money really reaches the vulnerable communities and they are able to do what they are supposed to do. So we want to say that these methods are helping us to devolve decision-making to the lowest level to be able to leave institutional legacies. So as we do this, we are calling upon corporate actors and other actors to join our communities in what they are doing, be able to support them, be able to help them monitor together, so that we are able to track what the changes we are making, and we are able to upscale the changes that we are making. So at WCCI, I think we have gone deep into the grassroots, and some of the indigenous knowledge we are collecting is actually being used to inform research also, because we work closely with research institutions also, so that we are able to continuously every day come up with new ideas, new suggestions that are owned by the community and are owned by us. So yeah. I think when we say keep it horizontal, we are really trying to keep our method horizontal as we grow with our communities, as we move vertically. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rosemary. Really appreciate the effort you've made also to join us today. I know it's been complex with no energy, no electricity where you were. I'm now going to invite Helen to lead the session, the interactive session, where you'll get to actually talk to each other and think about what you think the top solutions are.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, panellists. Oh, that's lovely. The aircon. Shall I come and stand this side? Fantastic. So what we're going to do now is we've got about 15 minutes. We've squeezed a little bit. So 15 minutes. We had thought what would be great. For those people who are online, I'll come to you in a minute. But for those people in the room, if you know your neighbour, then please do feel free to find someone else to talk to. But if you don't know your neighbours, please turn your chairs, talk to each other in a small group of maybe 2 or 3. And we've got some questions here, just a couple of questions. Having heard some of these presentations from the panel and based on your own experience, we'd like you to have a conversation for about, I don't know, let's say 10 minutes or up to 10 minutes between yourselves on these 2 questions. So what is it that different groups need to do? So we've heard a lot about what intermediaries might need to do or what they're asking for. We've heard what some of the bilateral donors are doing. What is it that you would like to see? What do you think from your experience? And then if we've got a big list, hopefully you'll come up with a big list, what would you prioritise in the next 12 months? So just to put a little bit more specificity, if there were certain things where you think there really is momentum here, we really can change if we were to do this in the next 12 months. So I'm going to ask you to just talk amongst yourselves, be ready, because we're going to go back after the 15 minutes. We're going to come back, and I'm going to invite Claire to just pull a few reflections from the group in the room and from the panelists, and hopefully from online, for some of the things that you've talked about. So panelists, you are welcome to talk amongst yourselves, or you can go and join people in the room. It is up to you. For those people virtually, you should see a Zoom link, which is somewhere in your chat. I'm sorry, I can't get onto it. Please go into that Zoom link, and hopefully you'll be able to have a conversation. If there's any problems, there should be people there to help you. So I'm going to start the timer now. So you've got about 10 to 15 minutes to talk amongst yourselves. Here are the questions. Get ready to share us some practical suggestions for actions that people could take.
Okay, so top issues, solutions that you want to ask others to do. Any thoughts from our experts in the room? And we're going to be really quick. Everyone's going to be super quick because we're running out of time.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Philip Kilonzo from Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. And I will contribute from an experience perspective, having been part of the team setting up the small grants facility for Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. I think number one, let's reorient our thinking. Let's forget about communities having capacity. Let's focus on our own capacity to serve the community. Because essentially the danger has been in pumping the capacity to the community, thinking that it's a community without the capacity. Indeed, it's our terms that are averse to the community because communities are operating in their own space. And we are basically assessing a fish on how to climb a tree. It will never happen. So let's focus. Number two, as we deal with a small grant, let's look at then the broad capacity that we need for influence. We are doing part of it, but the bigger fund is within the multilateralism. How are we supporting communities to drive the scope of influence that is so critical in that particular spaces for that funding to flow, including reforming the global architecture for that funding to speak to the local aspirations? Let me pause there.
That's absolutely wonderful. Two incredibly important points. Our own ability to work with the local level and our support to them to influence.
Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Frida Geduku from Grassroots Kenya, a network of grassroots organizations. I had the opportunity to work with both USAID and GIZ, but this is not the time to share feedback. My comment is like, we all agree that climate change is a crisis. So the funding for a crisis cannot be restricted funding. It has to be open, to be flexible, and it should not trickle. It should flow, as Charles mentioned.
A call for financing to be flexible and responsive to the needs locally.
So hi, I'm Veronica. I'm a research funder from Australia. And so I'm always looking at what are the unanswered questions, right? And what can I do to help answer those? And it seems to me, hearing the conversation today, one of the key barriers here is actually the way donors think about this, right? So donors want, put all these transaction costs in place, right? Because they want absolute assurity that their money is going to be spent in exactly the right ways. And so that's fundamentally a risk perception of donors. So maybe what I can do is fund some research into what are the actual risks of money being misspent through locally led adaptation.
Well, that's a powerful offer indeed. And I'm coming to you afterwards. We're just going to go to our two colleagues from the online group, so they are not excluded. Could we have your top points from the online conversations? Tamara?
Yes, hi, can you hear us?
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. So in our virtual group, a lot of the points that came up in the discussion earlier were echoed around the importance of collaboration with all actors who are involved. So really emphasizing the importance of working not just with local communities, but bringing in national governments, bringing in research organizations, and bringing all partners together, and really emphasizing the importance of mutual accountability, sort of recognizing that we all have things to learn, and no one's perfect. And so if we can kind of create structures and systems where everyone's brought to the table, communities are involved in national processes, and we're holding one another accountable, that's sort of one of the important next steps. Nicola, do you want to come in with some of the other points raised?
If that's your top one, we'll go to the other group. We're just having to be really brief. I might come back if we've got more time.
No worries, that's fine. You come back to me if you like.
No, your top point from your group as well.
We actually only had one online group, but there are a few other points. Just that it's really important to also support organisational resilience and support governance structures that are decentralised and that really kind of enable these processes. Yeah, I think that was the top points really that we had from our online group.
Thank you so much. So I'm fascinated by how much of the conversations are the same points that this group came up with, because obviously they're experts. Here you go.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tracy Lane. I'm with KPMG in East Africa, and we frequently act as one of the intermediaries between the donors and then the communities who are receiving funding. So I've learned a lot here, and we discussed some of the issues. I won't just raise my point, so I'll raise two or three. We spoke about long-term strategy. Two. We talked about the need for community-level long-term strategies that are really identifying all of the priorities so that that's in place when the funding comes around, and making sure that the right actors are involved in that process, including the CSOs, women, etc. From the intermediary perspective, when we act in this role, what I've learned is the need to really simplify access. And I'm wondering now what we can, not just wondering, but we'll look at what we can do to make that easier while still meeting the requirements of the donors. But what can we do to make that more simple? I like the idea of the video applications. How can we learn from other sectors that are actually getting funding down to the grassroots level in a very quick and efficient manner? So, thank you.
Excellent. So others? Do we have anyone from this? Should we ask one of you to? Yeah.
Yeah, we had an interesting discussion about aggregators because we want to make sure that when we support locally led initiatives, we don't end up with little specific actions, but we do end up with little specific actions that on aggregation have the impact that we desire for communities, but also that donors and governments want to see. So there is a difference between aggregators and intermediaries. Aggregators should be those who are able to talk to the community. It could be community organizations, or it could be other civil society organizations. It could even be subnational governments, somewhere in the middle that is able to talk to communities and aggregate those initiatives and face the challenge also of being able to report aggregated measures. So that's part of the discussion. I don't know if you want to complement. Yeah. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So I found it an incredibly rich discussion, and I've been working pretty much just on this for some time now. So, top lessons, what are we saying? We need to simplify and streamline, and that's from the providers and the intermediaries can do more to innovate in how we do that. We need to do better at collaboration, both vertically across the governance layers, horizontally across actors, and invest in relationships to build that trusted relationships that actually improve our ability to serve the needs of the community. Sorry, I'm trying to build ideas together. And really focus on the flexible finance and the influence at that local level to give them the opportunity to influence up through the different layers of governance and across horizontally to other organizations. We've heard about risk pooling. We've heard about sort of different ways we can use technology. We've heard this opportunity to look at risk perception and what the real risks are. I think there's a really big agenda emerging here, and I'd really welcome you all to continue in the locally led discussions. There are several more coming in the next few days. But also to join our community of practice. If you haven't already endorsed the principles, please do, or just reach out to us and say that you'd like to join the community of practice. We are very keen to keep growing this movement, very keen to keep bringing together different actors across the movement to learn from each other and to work out how we do this well and really get finance where it matters most. Thank you all so much, and thank you all panelists so much for joining us today.